Did you ask about Pick 3 from the Ohio Lottery? Okay, Pick 3 is a daily draw game where you pick 3 individual numbers between 0 and 9 that can be played straight, where numbers must be drawn in an exact order or boxed where they can be drawn in any order. You can win hundreds, and wagers start at only 50 cents. Want to learn more? Okay, go to ohiolottery.com or the Ohio Lottery app. Lottery players are subject to Ohio laws and commission regulations. Play responsibly.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 533, and the Germans were left standing alone. Last time, the Soviet offensive against the Second Hungarian Army commenced on January 12, 1943. Again, there was no massive artillery barrage. No, General Golinkov would have his men simply move forward, testing the enemy as they went. And he could do this because his front had 347,000 men. Soon the men of the Soviet 40th Army were engaging the Hungarian 3rd Corps' 7th Light Division and the German 429th Grenadier Regiment next to them. Fortunately, these two units held. Unfortunately, while the Germans in the 7th Light Division's 35th Regiment held, the same could not be said for the other regiment, the Hungarian 4th. With the lines in front of the 4th falling, some Hungarians threw their rifles down and raised their hands up. It was only a few at first, but it allowed more Russian troops to advance, so more and more Hungarians started to surrender, which did them no good. Some were kept alive, most were not. As the 4th no longer existed as a defensive unit, the Soviets rushed past them, causing chaos in the rear. Soon, Soviet troops were not just engaging the reserve units, they were already behind them. The next to fall was the Hungarian artillery lines and storage depots. This caused the larger Hungarian 7th Light Division to fall apart. Thus, a retreat was ordered to try to avoid encirclement. As for the 3rd Corps' headquarters, they soon had few responses to their radio messages. What followed was a 3-mile-wide gap between the shattered and/or retreating 3rd Corps and the 4th Corps. Fortunately, this was why Corps Kramer, the reserve force, had been created. But when General Yanni reached out to him, he was told, "Look, von Salmuth's second, relatively weak German army was also being attacked, and they were holding firm, so if they could do it, you could do it too. This problem is yours to solve," or words to that effect. The day ended with Soviet troops running around the Hungarians' rear lines, and General Golinkov ordered a fresh assault for the next morning. Thus, the next day, January 13th, while still dark, as Golinkov's staff had worked through the night to bring up more of everything, the stubborn Hungarian 7th Corps' Light 20th Division and the German 429th Grenadier Regiment was hit anew. Knowing this would end badly for them if something did not change, the Hungarian 3rd Corps' deputy commander led 4 Hungarian infantry battalions, coupled with the panzers of Corps Kramer's 700 detachment, in a counterattack. If they could catch the Soviets off guard, then perhaps the line could be reformed here. But the Soviets were not thinking of anything other than advancing, per their orders. So, for most of the day, this counterattack led to intense fighting, at times hand-to-hand. But as the day drew on, the German 700th Detachment was whittled down to 4 panzers. As for the Hungarian battalions, they were wiped out. Before the sun set, what was left of the defensive line here fell back. Yet there was no panic. The Hungarians had fought as they retreated. The commander of the German 429th would later say, "The Hungarian troops fought very well. The reason for the failure of their counterattack was that their attacking forces had no answer to the enemy's armor. The freezing weather didn't help either." By the opening of the third day, January 14th, the Soviet commander Golinko could see that the enemy was crumbling. So, he released another attack. Up to this point, the Soviet 3rd Tank Army had been limited to pinning down the Hungarian left wing, while the initial breach was made and then exploited. But no more. The Soviet 3rd Tank Army advanced. The 12th and 15th Tank Corps advanced with riflemen riding atop the T-34s, and they came right at the Hungarian 4th Corps. The men of the Hungarian 12th Light Division resisted them as best they could, but no help was coming, thanks to the attacks of the Soviet 18th Rifle Corps, hitting their flanks, cutting off outside help. And the Soviet plan here worked as well as the others. The Hungarian 4th and 7th Corps began to split away from each other in reaction to these attacks. The other factor, again, was the minus 30 degrees Celsius and the wind, which was flying ice into the face of the defenders. The Axis lines fell apart, and there would be no counterattack to alter this. The Hungarians started falling back to the next river behind them. The Russians kept coming, and most times were able to hit the rear elements and take control of supply piles. But not always. There were moments if the Soviet tanks went too far to the rear too fast, they were stopped by concentrated firepower. As with the Romanians, even a small number of anti-tank guns could have made a difference here. Turns out the Swiss-made 20mm Solotherm S18 1100 anti-tank rifle could not penetrate the T-34's armor, even if they were firing at close range. The result? Some Soviet tanks advanced 12 miles that day. Calls made for help were either not responded to or did not get through in the first place. Thus, the Hungarian Second Army was fighting on its own, outmanned and outgunned. And it was about to get worse. By the 4th day of this local fighting, Operation Mars to the north had been called off. Now, those supplies were being redirected to Operation Little Saturn.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
With this additional fuel, the T-34s were able to keep going. The Hungarian 3rd Corps, now without the defiant 7th Light Division, watched as 2 of its remaining divisions were pushed north, away from their countrymen and closer to the 2nd German Army, which was dealing with its own intense pressure. The result of this was that General Yanni no longer had command over these 2 divisions. Now, for better or worse, they were a part of the German Second Army. Sensing what the Soviets were up to, the harassed 6th and 9th Light Divisions stood up to the Russians, who were trying to encircle them. This stand would go on for the next 10 days. Meanwhile, they slowly retreated, eventually putting their backs to the river behind them, which would force the Soviets to come right at them. It was now that the desperate von Weeks ordered the 168th Infantry to advance just south of the Hungarian Hole, hoping a new line formed here would force the Soviets to stop driving west, as their rear might be attacked by them. And the 168th gave a good account of themselves, but there just weren't enough of them to turn the tide. They held their line, but enemy troops were going around either side of them. Zooming out a bit, the Soviet plan was to slice up the larger enemy line, cutting off sections, but this was also happening on a much smaller scale. The Italian Alpini Corps and the Vicenza Division had been facing south to stop attacks on their supplies, but as their comrades around them started falling back, they were soon being threatened with truly being isolated. Still, von Weeks ordered its commanding officer, General Nassi, to stand firm, that he was being personally held responsible. The next day, January 16th, as the ground was still covered with a freezing fog, the German nor Hungarian pilots could do anything to help the infantry, and they were only a few miles away, yet they might as well have been back home. By now, the OKW, the Armed Forces High Command, was aware of what was unfolding. This was not simply an attack to straighten out a line or to coal some wayward Axis troops in the front. It was another Operation Uranus. Yet there was little they could do about it, as the Soviets were also attacking to the far north, along the Volkhov River. They were still trying to lift the siege of Leningrad. This indecision by the Axis would be used by Golinko and Vatutin of his southwestern front, as these two generals would work together to keep the pressure on the enemy here. Meanwhile, to the south, Army Group A was still on the move to make sure it wasn't trapped in the Caucasus before Rostov itself was invested. But back to the fighting around the Hungarians, the only uncommitted Axis force to date was Kramer Corps and the 1st Hungarian Armored Field. They had been sitting, listening, and waiting for 5 days. But that was over. The OKW sent the signal. Go. Hungarian cavalryman Javos Veres, in command, had been waiting for this moment. He knew his unit lacked anti-tank guns, so they improvised. As his 130 Hungarian tanks moved out, followed by dozens of trucks filled with infantrymen, underneath their seats were many, many Molotov cocktails. It was to be 130 Hungarian tanks, infantry, and artillery against Pavel Rybolko's 56,000 men and 200 tanks, backed by another 100 tanks of the 40th Army. Having said that, these Hungarians were well-trained and eager. The 1st and 5th Motorized Artillery Battalions dashed to their pre-reconnoiter gun lines. Next, the division's 24 105mm guns were loaded and ready to fire. Veres and his tanks drove to the northeast, towards the town of Ostrogorsk, where many of their comrades were retreating to. His leading 38 tanks spotted the T-34s, who started firing with their heavy guns. A few of Veres's tanks went silent, which is when the Hungarian tanks themselves split into two, heading towards the flanks of the T-34s. Knowing the Soviet metal beast's armor was thinner on the side, the Hungarian tanks started firing. Now it was the lead T-34s going silent. These tank crews climbed out of their tanks, only to be shot down by the Hungarians. As the lead Soviet tanks came to a halt, now the large Hungarian guns opened up, taking out more T-34s. As a tank was hit, the Soviet infantry riding atop then flew into the air, dead before they hit the ground. This was a good beginning for the Hungarians, and though they were causing damage, there simply weren't enough 105mm guns or tanks to truly stop this Soviet advance. Besides, now the Soviet guns to their rear were opening up. The Hungarian guns, one by one, were destroyed, their crews killed. As for the wrecked Hungarian and Soviet tanks, the smoke from these wrecked vehicles left a wall obscuring everything behind it. Suddenly, fresh Soviet tanks, the reserves, came exploding out of the smoke, coming right at the Hungarian force. Veres had no choice but to order a retreat. This counterattack was over. Still, there was the larger fight, so Veres, knowing the battle was lost here, sought to buy time for his comrades in retreat. Thus he split what was left of his force. One unit would go to Iovska, the other to the army headquarters at Alexeyevka. The former was just a few miles north of the latter. This would be Veresh's attempt to build a new line of defense. If this line could surprise the Soviets enough that they slowed down, then perhaps some of his countrymen could be saved. Meanwhile, the Soviet 18th Rifle Corps, the unit that had thrashed the Hungarian 12th Light Division, was now doing the same to the 10th Light Division. First, after breaking through the defensive lines, the Soviets captured the enemy's artillery and separated the formations further. With their job done, the Soviet 40th Army took over and pushed the survivors towards Ostrogorsk. Ironically, this was where most of the Hungarians wanted to go, as they knew there were fortifications there. But for the Soviets, Ostrogorsk would be the final destination for many of their foes today, which was quite a clever tactic. If the enemy could not be destroyed outright, then push them to where they want to go, but then surround them. From there, they could either surrender or die. When it became clear to the Hungarians that Ostrogorsk was to be the rallying point, they now called on cavalryman Veresh, with parts of Corps Kramer, to come to their rescue. In response, these tanks and trucks set out, as there may yet be an opportunity to not only save their comrades, but to inflict heavy casualties on the enemy. It would be neither. The relief force only covered a few miles towards Ostrogorsk before they themselves were stopped cold. From there, they would have to fall back, lest they become encircled.
The Kentucky Derby's almost here, and you can get in on all the Derby Day action with FanDuel. That's right, you can bet the big race without leaving the Sportsbook app. So what are you waiting for? Download the app and bet America's #1 race with America's #1 Sportsbook app right now. 21 plus and reside in Ohio. Offer valid on first real money wager of 10 cents or more. Verified FD Racing account required. Bonus issued in non-withdrawable racing site credit that expires 7 days after issuance. Max refund $500. Restrictions apply. See terms at racing.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Trying to salvage this nightmare, General Yanni looked at his maps, and he took the advice of Veresh, who realized the remaining Hungarians had to focus their troops on a few cities, those with rail lines and/or road junctions. This gave them options to either retreat faster or bring up supplies quicker, which made making a list of these cities quite easy. Ostrogorsk, Nikolaevka, and Alexeyevka. See episode cover. The idea was to form lines here to take on the Soviets, meanwhile building more substantial defensive lines behind them further west. However, Generals Golinkov and Vatutin were guessing that's what the enemy would do. So how to disrupt that? They would attack Alexeyevka, as it served as the center of this new forming line. Veresh dashed to Alexeyevka and put half of his armor here. The other half he put just north of here at Iovska. Soon, the northern half was augmented by Hungarian Air Force personnel, support staff, and anti-aircraft teams, which had nothing else to do due to the weather. And coming at them all was the Soviet 40th Army. But in their haste to attack, the Soviet 40th arrived at Iovska before their artillery teams could set up. Thus, the Russians attacked across the open, but now empty, airfield. But with no place to hide, they started taking heavy casualties. This brought them up short. Switching tactics, General Moskalenko of the 40th Army had some of his forces move a bit to the south to break the link between Ivoshka and Alexeyevka to the south. As Yanni and Veresh had no reserves, hell, they didn't have enough men now, they could not reinforce this mid-part that was about to be hit. Besides, nighttime was coming, and the Soviets, out of necessity, were much better than the Hungarians at night fighting. Whatever was going to happen was going to happen. Sure enough, before midnight, the link between the two Hungarian outposts was broken. Alexeyevka was cut off, and General Yanni at Alexeyevka could not reach anyone outside of his current location. And as all of this had been a desperate attempt to save something of the Hungarian army in the first place, yet it had failed, the rest was just a matter of time. There were not enough tanks or guns to fight back effectively, and not enough trucks to carry the men away to fight another day. It didn't help that on January 18th, Hitler ordered Ostrogorsk, Fortress Ostrogorsk. We've seen this before. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So, as we can see, so the Romanians, the Italians, the Hungarians, they're all gone. It's now just the Germans, and the Germans are weaker. So, again, a pretty brilliant strategy by the Soviets. So we'll see what happens next time. But obviously, they're going to have to back up because they don't have the men to guard the real estate. So you have to fall back. But we'll watch that unfold. Let's see here. I don't have any new members or donations, so I'm just going to randomly thank some of the members. Let's see here. Darren Edmonds and James Powell. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Colton Hecker, Martin Nicolai, and Nicholas D'Angelo. I hope I got that right, Nicholas. I'm sorry, D'Angelo. Yeah, I feel confident in that. Anyway, so I do have some interviews coming up. There's some neat stuff, but I'll keep the pace going because we're covering a lot of information. And I'll get to some point. I don't want to get too far into 1943, but I want to show what happens after Stalingrad was saved. Then we'll put a pin in it, and then bring in the Americans with Operation Torch because I don't want to leave that part too far behind. So, we'll see how it unfolds. Take care, everyone.
One of the largest Star Wars fan collections in the world is coming to Kosai. Unofficial Galaxies opens on May 10th, and this is a one-of-a-kind exhibition with iconic characters, props, legendary ships, costumes, and behind-the-scenes secrets. It's going to be a must-see whether you're a hardcore Star Wars fan or just curious about one of the most famous sci-fi franchises of all time. Unofficial Galaxies is coming to Kosai starting on May 10th, so get your tickets now at kosai.org.
Incoming transmission.
Hello, and welcome to History Dispatches.
We are the father-son duo bringing you the weird, the wild, the wacky, and the craziest tales from across time.
From the Ice Bowl
to the Great Heathen Army.
And the head of Oliver Cromwell.
The same head they kept on a pike for 3 years?
Yep, all here on History Dispatches.
New episodes every weekday.
Find out more at historydispatches.com or wherever you get your podcast app.